Welcome to the Female CEO podcast, hosted by Sephton. You may know her name, but do you know her story? This podcast takes you behind the titles and into the moments that shape some of today's most inspiring women. We explore the paths they've taken, the businesses they've built, and how they've created success on their own terms. Created by the Female CEO Create, Evolve, Overcome, these are honest, human conversations, rooted in real experience. Let the journey begin.
Welcome to the Female CEO podcast, where today we are diving into a full spectrum approach to high performance, identity, and personal power. Many women in leadership reach a point where external success no longer covers up that internal burnout, prompting a deeper search for purpose. Today's guest is an innovator who traded a high-flying career in the fashion and beauty industry to become a sacred nervous system and shadow integration coach. Jane Bellis, the founder of Mojo School, has spent the last decade mastering the art of human behavior, combining grounded neuroscience with ancient spiritual wisdom. She is here to share her revolutionary Netflix for well-being digital ecosystem. So please welcome Jane to the show. Good to have you.
Thank you, Mark. I'm super excited.
Me too, because actually me and you and our paths have not crossed before until now. And
Right.
typically a lot of the women that I've captured on the Female CEO, not all, but a good portion are women that I've crossed before, done work with, collaboration. So I always enjoy meeting a new face. So it's
Ooh.
it's
So
great.
this will be interesting for you then, right?
Of course. I mean, I find podcasting interesting anyway, in the sense of like, I'm always curious about why someone does what they do. I love that human behavior. A lot of the work that you do, I find like fascinating. So for me, I always think that my challenge, as always, is to create something with you that is really impactful for those that listen, but also so that me and you can enjoy it as well, and actually learn something, expand or grow.
Oh, I love that. Absolutely love it. Yeah. Beautiful. Beautifully said.
Now, you built a highly successful career in the fashion and beauty world before experiencing burnout and returning to the healing arts, as we call it. What was the exact catalyst that made you realize that external glamour could no longer sustain your internal well-being?
Ooh, great question. Yeah, it was a really interesting journey because I had a bucket list of things from a very early age that I wanted to tick off, and I'd kind of checked them all off the list. Everything looked great on the outside. I was a high-flying working mom. I've got 4 children. I had 3 successful salons at one point, and I'd secured some really cool roles with all the beautiful people and all the glamorous stuff. So I'd done London Fashion Week a couple of times, and then New York Fashion Week. I became creative director for one of the big global shows. So on the surface, that's winning at life, right? I've got the superhero cape. I'm doing the school runs and the sports days, and I've got a full client list back home, and I'm jetting off to do all these great, exciting things. But the internal just lack of fulfillment was one part of it. The things that I thought would fulfill me just didn't. And I'd created this version of myself that was really performative. So on the surface of it, everything was great, right? I mean, Instagram wasn't a thing at the time, but Facebook and all of the socials and the magazine articles looked perfect. So I'd created this monster that then I felt that I couldn't admit, actually, it's not great, it doesn't feel right. So that was one big element. And then the second was the environment and the industry itself. So, particularly as a mother, I'm raising 2 girls and 2 boys, very different, in a time and a society that's incredibly toxic and damaging to mental health. Mental health was just really beginning to be a real buzzword. Finally, we discovered that we actually do all have a mental health. Who knew, right? So we were starting to talk about these things, and I had all of my clients back home that I was seeing on a regular basis. And for anybody in the industry, we tend to be in beauty and hair and salon industry in particular, the unqualified, untrained therapist. You have a steady stream of people coming in to see you every day and offloading, and you absorb all of that, and you get to speak to people about some really difficult challenges that they're having, usually around not feeling good enough, being burned out themselves, having these unseen aspirations that they feel that they're not reaching, and therefore their self-esteem takes such a big hit. So I had that part of my life, and then I was jetting off and, for me, becoming part of the problem, because I'd be part of creating these stunning, beautiful imagery in magazines and cover shots and the runway, all the glamorous stuff, making this image of perfection. And I loved my work. I loved the creativity and the artistry behind it. And I loved the high pressure, managing a big team. Live TV, it was great. For my adrenaline buttons were pushed. I loved it. But it started to feel more and more toxic, and I felt really uncomfortable in my body that I actually was part of that problem of creating this environment where we prey on people's vulnerabilities to make a profit. Here's a miracle cure. Here's the next fashion. Do this and you'll feel amazing and fulfilled and fit into this little box of perfection and all will be well. And I could see it from both sides very, very clearly. And I think I had a unique position there to be able to see it from both of those sides. So I remember being backstage at a big show, and I could see these beautiful young girls that were just living off, a couple of lines of Coke and an apple a day to stay in this image that they were told was perfection. And they had the cripplingly low self-esteem that you would never imagine from these beautiful people. And I thought, wow, this is really interesting, because everybody back home wants to be you, and you don't even want to be you. And we're, pumping everybody out as a little production line of perfection. And the whole thing is just wrong. It's not right. It's not aligned, and it doesn't fit with who I really am, which sent me into my own existential crisis of, well, who am I then? Because I thought I'd done everything that I wanted to do as a leader in business and the mum and the business owner. So that was a challenge, trying to work out what to do with all of that information.
That's a gorgeous start, Jane. I always like to take notes, when I'm doing a podcast. It's just so that I can learn and really double down into things and really listen into what you're saying. There's a couple of things here that kind of stood out. One was that need for fulfillment, even though you on the outside looked like you had it all, and you were very successful and you had influence, and you realized that. I love that self-awareness of you saying, I felt like I was part of the problem. One other thing that I just want to touch on with you, and I want you to go a little deeper and explain this a little bit more. You said that you felt uncomfortable in your own body, and I find that that's really topical at the moment when I think of the fact that, we often think of our values, our intuition, or our guts, and our nervous system, and how we need to be honoring those three parts in order to really find fulfillment. So what does it look like for you in terms of feeling uncomfortable in your body? And do you use that now as a way to navigate through life?
What a brilliant question. Yeah, I think probably, and there's a lot of, as you can probably tell, there's a lot of facets to my story. But, it's quite a Batman origin story. There's a lot of things that I've done and experienced, and a lot of things as part of my business now that I share. So it's sometimes quite difficult to explain all of those different elements. But fundamentally, I think the biggest piece of wisdom and the biggest tool that I share now, especially with burnout, so I teach a lot of support around burnout, and especially with women, particularly Gen X women, like me, this theme of women that are coming my way, is to listen, learn, and tap into your body's intelligence, because your body will always tell you. It will always give you signs and symptoms, but we very rarely listen. And especially my own story from lived experience was absolutely categorically ignoring every single sign that my body gave me. And I look back now and think the signs were there for such a long time, but this pattern in my brain, this distorted thinking, this cognitive approach of the expectation I thought was on me, the pressure that I'd created for myself, the labels, the roles, the responsibilities, the monster I created. Every time my body gave me a piece of wisdom or a piece of information, I would slam the lid down on it. No, I haven't got time for that. No, people need you. No, you have to do this, you have to do that. And it became almost like wearing a badge of honor. I look back now, I think, gosh, this is so awful, so toxic. I hope I can help people not get to this point. But the more my body suffered, the more I was going to win this medal. But I didn't win a medal. There's no medal for listeners out there and viewers. There's no medal. But I really felt like if I could just suffer a bit more, that would be the winning point. You know, if I can shoulder all these burdens, take on everybody else's stuff, raise my kids, be all things to all people, and manage the discomfort, that's the winning, that's the key. And of course it's back to front. That's not how it actually works. But for me, for a long time it was. The more symptoms I could repress and deal with, it meant I was a stronger woman. I was more capable. I was going to achieve more because I was able to survive in this, this space where you had to be survival of the fittest, right? You had to be tougher, you had to be smarter, you had to be stronger. So that distorted thinking for me was, well, obviously I'm really tough. I've been through childbirth 4 times, went straight back to work with no maternity leave. Check me out, I'm badass. That was just awful. I should never have done that to myself. It just wasn't, but it was for me at the time. It's like, that's what I have to do to prove myself. That's what I need to do. And now I've got my girls, my girls having babies now. Like, do not do that. You rest and you recover and you make self-care a priority, and you work with your nervous system, and then you can show up from a place of overflow, not from a place of complete depletion. So a lot of my teachings now are around that. Guess what happened to me? Don't do that. It didn't work very well.
Jen, what part of your childhood do you believe was the result of you feeling so driven to have to prove yourself?
Well, I talk about this quite a lot because obviously in my title, it's a lot of nervous system and shadow integration. So for me, shadow work is the key to everything, the key that unlocks everything, shining a light on the stuff that you generally keep hidden away in the shadows. Because you have to feel some feels, right? It's uncomfortable. So you have to be able to manage your body's intelligence. And so I did a lot of work around that before I started to teach it, because you have to do that very safely. And for me, it was winding it all the way back to, and I've written about this quite a lot. I've got a little book that I've written, and I'm just about to release a bigger book, and everything's in there. That whole pattern from very early on, being super, super sensitive, very sensitive little girl, quite quiet and shy, just absorbing everything around me, everybody's emotional kind of overwhelm. Energy is my first language. So at a very early age, I could sense what was going on in the room before people even spoke. And if there was a mismatch between what they were saying and what was actually being felt, it was quite apparent to me. So my family, love my family to bits, but they are bonkers. I can look back now and think, I can see this and I can see that. And the general theme was, keeping up with the Joneses. Everything needs to be perfect. We don't show big emotions. We don't, we don't do anything that's too much. We just sort of seen and not heard and stand there, look pretty and do, fulfill the roles. That was the unspoken rule for me as a child, or that's how I perceived it. And then the big catalyst was, like many people have, parents split when I was 11. So that kind of fracture at that point, after learning about my attachments, I have to be a good girl. I have to never make a fuss, never show emotion, be stoic and resilient and strong, absorb other people's stuff. That was the early pattern. Then when the parents split, a dad, super driven businessman, like mega, mega driven, emotionally completely detached off somewhere else, just mom completely emotionally overwhelmed, dad completely emotionally absent. So that little split created this perfect storm for this overachiever. Never show your own emotions, never admit what you're actually feeling, because it's dangerous and you have to put yourself at the back of the list, fix everybody else. But also, you must also be all things to all people, be really motivated, run a business, be successful, so you can be seen and chosen and loved from that direction. It's like brilliant psychology. I had my own best case study. If you can, if you can get to the point where you can move through some of the feelings and integrate and embody the difficult challenges of that, it's interesting to observe, what's happened in your childhood and in your parents' childhood. And, things get passed on generation after generation until someone breaks the cycle, my friend. That whole, it ran in the family till it ran into me stuff is it's a big thing, I think.
I like that. That was powerful. Ran in the family until it ran into me. That's beautiful.
It takes a level.
That's the right quote, that one.
Isn't it? It takes such a lot of self-awareness, though, and I was on a podcast the other day actually talking about spiritual bypassing. There's no you have to do the work to be able to really, really move into that space. You can't break cycles. You can't, truly heal and then support your kids and their kids if you don't do the messy, shadowy work. It's no shortcut. You have to do it.
I like it. Your mythology beautifully blends that grounded neuroscience with that sacred spiritual wisdom and cutting edge technology. How do you then help analytical, logic driven women to accept that spiritual side of healing without losing that practical edge?
These questions are great, absolutely brilliant, because that's probably the hardest part. It's so frustrating because the most difficult part for me running this business now is knowing the impact that this kind of work has, knowing how powerful it is. But the challenge of getting people like me, these very highly driven, successful, entrepreneurial women stuck in hustle mode, getting the conversations and getting that, it's psychological and emotional safety, building that container for them to be able to breathe for a second and get the defenses down slightly so that they're not no, I haven't got time for this. No, that's ridiculous. No, I was told that was silly woo-woo nonsense, because there's so many labels that come with the more spiritual side. And I love my positioning now, feels so authentic for me, right in the middle, because I found that I was too clinical for the very spiritual space and I was way too woo-woo for the scientific space. So my space is just in the middle. I think a lot of people resonate there, but with the kind of high performing women, it's such a challenge to be able to allow yourself to even think differently, to even think something else is possible. That was it for me. I'd created this space where I was the top of my food chain and everything in my head I believe was correct. And the challenge to even admit there might be a crack or I might need to think a little bit differently sent my nervous system into a spiral, because then that kind of cognitive dissonance creates this fear that, well, what else is right? What else am I doing wrong? What else is going to come out of this? I don't have the time or the capacity to allow myself to feel anything because I'm so busy and I'm so important. The ego steps into the room quite a lot. And that's a piece of work to kind of just explore, just explore. There's so much wisdom out there and so many tools, and it doesn't have to be this chaotic crisis. It can be quite a gentle approach. But it's just fundamental for success, I believe. Long-term sustainable success. You can have the highs, you can make the money, you can have the nice, pretty things, but sustainable, authentic, embodied success, I think there's no shortcut. You have to work through this whole framework.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I know that obviously one of your specialities is in this nervous system regulation, helping leaders, move out of that constant survival mode and into something more sustainable. What are some of the hidden signs that you see, Jane, that maybe are hindering or causing a struggle with high achieving women's nervous system that is secretly running on flames?
I think there's quite a few, so I'm going to be careful with my words to get sort of the most impactful signs for me. And I think anybody who says, and I'm talking about myself in the burnout days, you don't understand, I haven't got time for this. I haven't got time to rest. I haven't got time to learn anything new or change my ways. There isn't time. That for me is the biggest red flag, because that's what I said so many times, which proved that I was happy to run, well, not happy to, but I was running on empty and I didn't want to even look at that, because now I think that was ridiculous. For me now, where I'm at, that thought process was so damaging and so toxic. But I can remember at the time really believing and being very threatened by someone who told me to take a break or to get a bit more balance. Really threatened, like, back off, you have no idea, the world needs me. I was so convinced that I had to fix everybody and do everything. It was a real fear response to even think about sitting down for a minute, and it's taken a while to process that. And it's the reason, I think, to go sort of tying this in with your last question, the reason my approach follows the medicine wheel framework, very ancient tool, is because we have 4 different parts of ourselves that people just should be in schools, we're not aware of it. And I always start with the mental space. So we all know we've got a mental health. And I think it helps this particular group, the CEOs, the female leaders, it certainly did with me. It was my first sort of introduction to this kind of work. The cognitive top-down approach, the psychological stuff first, because if I say to somebody who's in burnout and running a big business, just sit and breathe. Here's a breathwork technique for you. They're not even going to, 9 times out of 10, it's just dismissed. Ridiculous. I've got time for that. Or get your shoes off, go and stand on the grass, touch some grass, love. It's not really accepted in that space. But when you move through the mental space first, as the first quarter for me, the first part of self, there's so much unlocking of wisdom. And I find that analytical driven brain, it's a very masculine approach, is okay, I can understand that. That makes sense. This is what's happening. This is the neurobiological response. This is what's actually happening chemically in my body. This is the science. This is credible. And there's less of a fight to move through the other bits then, because it's an obvious progression then, right? So then we start to move into the next part, which is somatic, which is bottom up body approaches. So once we have the understanding of what's going on and why it's happening, it seems to be a key that unlocks this credibility for the rest and this, well, obviously that's what's happening. What do I do about it? And then you can kind of provide a bit of a tick list of, right, next you need to build a toolkit for your nervous system, bottom up, somatics. You have to learn how to regulate and switch back out of fight or flight mode. And then you have a nice little balance then, but it's still only half the picture. So once we've kind of got those bits in place, we move to the next part, which is the emotional self, the emotional literacy. And that's where a lot of the shadow work sits. But you can't do that until you understand why you're doing it and you have a toolkit for your nervous system. You just can't jump to that bit because that's just unboxing a load of trauma without the right knowledge and support. But I think that's where the magic lies. When you can get to that point, then you start to do this kind of timeline work where you go back to little 11-year-old Jane. This is what happened. This is why I think this way. This is my belief. Is that real? Is that true? Or is it distorted? And you can start to then unpick the threads and kind of weed out some of the stuff that you don't need. And I talk about it in, it's like you've got a million tabs open. You've got programs running in the background that actually were programmed in from somebody else when you were 6 or 8 or 10, or you don't need it. You can swipe up and uninstall that particular program because it's just draining your battery, taking up all your bandwidth. So I use a lot of terminology like that helps kind of understand, because it worked for me. I wanted that quite clinical approach to start with. And then we move through into kind of the more energetic stuff and different kinds of language to build this holistic picture, because that's the point. It's not just one thing. It's not just one tool. It's not one size fits all prescriptive. That's back to the toxic fashion and beauty industry. Wear this dress and you'll feel great. It doesn't work that way. The individual has to go on this exploration and understand where it's come from for them and what works for them and what their body's telling them, because that will be different for each and every person. That's the challenge, I guess.
I like how you've explained that and that process. So I think that's really helpful for people to be able to understand how it works, and if they're going through this process, that they kind of are able to see where they're at. Why is doing the shadow work for you, Jane, actually the fastest route for a leader to reclaim their true identity and purpose?
I think, and it moves on beautifully from the last question, I think when you can understand purely from a business perspective now, purely from like bottom line, if you understand that you have too many tabs open and you are leaking out energy, therefore you are leaking out potentially money, profit, future, sustainability of your business. When you actually accept that, even if you can't accept the more emotional stuff, just from a business perspective, it's not sustainable. You cannot operate on fumes. You really can't. You have to get that oxygen mask on. I think it then becomes easier to make the decision to actually do something about it, for starters. And for me, I mean, there's so many different ways that you can approach this, I think. And for my particular piece of work, I've tried to make it as broad as possible how you can get in. And there's so many tools out there, it can get quite overwhelming. If you start to Google shadow work, what do I do next? You burn out just looking at, just going through all the search engine stuff. So I wanted to find a way to make something that felt like Netflix for self-development. So there's kind of my Mojo School approach is self-paced. If you want that, I've got a specific course on burnout. Get the burnout course, tools are in there, do it in your own time. Videos are like 5 minutes, like reels, a bit longer than reels. And there's some really cool step-by-step stuff. I'm not over your shoulder. You don't have to show up for anything. You don't have the pressure of admitting. I found that really difficult, admitting that there was a problem, because it's in your own time, in your own space. Might be a couple of videos from me, but I'm not in the room with you. That's one way to do it. And there's obviously one-to-one real deep dive where I do a lot of the sacred nervous system stuff, not for the faint-hearted, but I would say the fastest way to really weed out the roots. I'm working with a woman at the moment as a teacher, and she's just sharing her story from the rooftops because it's just made her pivot so completely with her business. We've got back to like age 6. Something happened in a classroom with a teacher at age 6 that impacted every part of the rest of her life, from her relationships to the reason she went into teaching, to the reason then she ditched teaching after 15 years and now has set up her own education business. There's so much to unpick, and she's managed that process really quickly because we could get to the very roots supported. We're doing some one-to-one work. So that's obviously the kind of the fastest route, because otherwise you stay at surface level. You weed out a little bit and you'll think, oh, I've completed life on expert level now. This is wonderful. And 6 months later, there's a pattern repeat, because that's what your brain does. It looks for patterns to repeat until you kind of learn something and process it. And you might find yourself saying, I thought I'd done this. I thought I'd completed it. And now this reminds me, and why is this always happening to me? It's because your subconscious mind is running on this loop. And if you don't get to the underneath bits, then you don't get to move forward in the best possible way.
Yeah, I definitely think if you're a teacher, you need just to really understand the importance and the power of influence that you have. Because I can recall, even for myself, 2 different events from teachers, one that was harmful and one that was healing. And I just think that if we're in a place where we're educating, coaching, mentoring, we've got to realize that the ears that are listening really need to hear something that's actually going to inspire them, heal them, help them grow, and not hinder them, discourage them, criticize.
There's such, beautifully put, there's such a level of responsibility in these spaces. And I don't think when we're in it, certainly from when I started on my journey into sort of coaching and mentoring, you still don't realize that it's such a position of power and responsibility. And if you come at it from a wounded space, and there's so many teachers, I do a lot of work in the education space trying to support teachers, and I'm trying to get through on a policy making level. We cannot keep going for our children in this way. It's not working. The kids are never the problem. It's the adults are always the problem. And if teachers can't regulate their own nervous system and understand human behavior, how the brain works, we've got no chance. We're just performative. We're just churning out data from tests rather than actually creating human beings that are capable and emotionally literate. And so it was a big piece of work for me, and I'm constantly banging on about this. The adults have to be able to understand what's going on for them and protect their own burnout. And yeah, I find it really interesting because I showed up originally at space and I was still burnt out. I was on the back end of my last burnout. And then I had this, oh, I know what I'm doing now. This feels more fulfilling. I'm just going to heal everybody and it's going to be great. And then that for me was another toxic space, because you create these codependent relationships, which you see a lot in the psychiatrists, psychologists, coaches, anyone who's in a leadership role. If it's not come from a place of real constant self-development, because you don't finish, you have to keep working on it, keep going, you end up in this space where you've got the person who stays in victim mentality and the person who's the fixer. That's not good for anyone. It's a permanent, I feel better because you need me. And the other person, well, I feel better because this person is my crutch. And what we need is proper facilitated spaces where we can process and metabolize these trapped emotions, get rid, with the nicest possible way. With my clients, I always say, I don't want to see you again. I don't want this 20-year relationship where you have to come to me every week. I want to see you flourish and thrive. I would love to have a short space of time where we can unlock these things. And then you don't need me. I wish we didn't need therapists and coaches in that space, in the mental health space, because we shouldn't. It should just be tools that are shared and collaborated with, because we're all on the same journey, right?
Lovely. You have a deep passion for supporting women who are navigating their 40s and beyond. And I was kind of curious why that specific age demographic, such as a critical, potent window for women to stop really playing small and step into their sovereign power. Just fascinated as to why that specific age.
It's really interesting. And I've had this conversation a few times, and it's certainly this year, the space that I'm absolutely locked into. And I've worked with many different demographics over the past 10 to 12 years in this space. I've worked with men's mental health spaces. I've worked with the homeless community. I've worked with addiction and recovery, kids in isolation rooms, school refusers, high achievers, real wide spectrum, because the tools that I've got are universal. If you're human, they will work, right? No matter what space you're in. But recently I found that a lot of women started to approach me. That's how it started. Women, less men all of a sudden. Women, and women of a certain age. I thought this was really interesting, because I'm not even going out fishing at the moment. I just put my stuff out for anybody who needs it to see, what resonates. Women, specifically 40 plus, seem to be at a point, and I think it's because, for me, I can only speak from my perspective, but also my clients at the moment and the women that I work with. We have these labels and roles and responsibilities, particularly as women. I'm sure men have their own versions of it, but that society places on you, and generational stuff filters through within this, but also you place on yourself. You have to be a good wife, a good mother. And nowadays we have to run businesses and be, sometimes breadwinners, certainly, contributing to finance. You have to be able to pick your kids up from school and go to sports days and do book club and be a seamstress that makes all the costumes. Never miss out on that. But you also have to run a 6-figure business, never complain, eat properly, cook nutritious meals from scratch, make sure you're taking all your supplements, and also fit in some nice breathing, time out with the kids. It's an impossible set of labels. It's just not possible. And we convince ourselves that that's what has to happen. And I think that's what leads to a lot of burnout, particularly when you're running a business as well. It's bad enough when you're not running a business, trying to kind of fit into these roles. And it's not just women who've had children, it's just women in general. We have this pressure to be all things to all people, never let the mask slip, always be on 24/7 for when anybody needs us, and really perform, because we're proving ourselves against an old kind of system where you have to be top dog, survival of the fittest, this masculine energy, which combats with our true nature a lot of the time. And I think when we get to the point where we hit 40, obviously there's lots of conversations about perimenopause. I'm like in the fire myself at the moment. And for me, I think there comes a point where your body says, nah, tapping out now. And to everybody else, it comes across that you're having some kind of crisis. You've gone crazy. You've suddenly become really mean because you're actually prioritizing a little sit down for yourself. And I want you to do this for me. You always do this. Why are you doing this for yourself? And it feels for everybody else like you're being problematic. But I think we're actually just realizing, I'm done. I can't do it. My well has run dry. There is no more energy to give. And there's not a choice in it. You have to look after yourself, because your body is just giving you so many signs. And I think the more you've repressed them, the bigger the signs and the more chaotic it feels. If you've had a good run at self-care and balance and kind of filling yourself up on a regular basis, I think it'll be easier. But a lot of women in business, particularly if you've had a family as well, I think you get to this brick wall that you cannot continue. You have to kind of blast through it somehow. Certainly for me, that was how it happened. But everybody else around me, I think they would probably have thought, oh, she's being really mean all of a sudden, not doing everything for everyone 24/7 and not answering emails at midnight. No, these are my working hours. Get over it. Boundaries, boundaries tend to have to come in when you reach this point, I think.
Yeah. It's so liberating, though, being able to honor yourself so that you can honor other people. And actually, I think the importance of being true to yourself is so important, because unless you're true to yourself, you can't actually be true to other people. You can't actually consistently give when actually you're depleted. And I think it's really important. I like the fact that, you were saying that it was women that were coming to you. I always think that your calling makes room for you. I always think that if you're a leader, then people will follow you. If you have the gift of healing, then you see a heart healed. For me, I really like that reality of our gift making room, where actually people come and search for us. They see it within. They're attracted to the way that we're living and showing up. And I think that's really fascinating hearing that from you.
Yeah, it's the authenticity, isn't it? And you kind of, for me, with all the masks I had early on, right the way through, I just refused to be authentic because it didn't feel safe, because I didn't learn that it was safe to show up as myself. So it
No.
took a lot of work to do that. But the second I started to prioritize that, and when I teach at the moment, the most difficult thing for women in this fawn response, this kind of please and appease fawn response, to say you have to prioritize yourself first is terrible. I mean, I can remember hearing it myself, thinking, yeah, whatever, never going to happen. It's terrifying in your body. It's, well, I just can't, because it's not safe, and people, I have to make sure I fix everything first. But when you lean into that and really do the work and start to practice, and you get better at it and it feels safer, and honestly, your bandwidth, if you're hustling and your bandwidth is full, there is no room for the right things to come in for you. There just isn't. The second you actually free up that bandwidth, I can promise you, the right things, the right people, the right situations, the right projects, they just find you. They've got no room otherwise. You're just stuck in hustle in the wrong space, in the wrong direction, until you do that piece of work, free up some space.
Jane, it's been a really gorgeous conversation. You made it very easy, very enjoyable. You're a great storyteller, really, really good.
Thank you.
Um,
Thank you. I appreciate that.
yeah, Jane, let people know where they can find you and your work. And
Mhm.
even though we're over time, I still want to give you a moment to just share anything intuitively that you kind of maybe want to leave us as we bring this into land.
Oh, thank you. I tend to, I like to talk, so I'm not surprised we've gone over, so apologies for that. But if you want to check things out, you can feel free to find me on my socials. So all the socials, it's at Mrs. Mojo Mindset. So go and have a little look. There's all kinds of free resources on there and links to the deeper stuff. The website is www.mymojoschool.com. You can have a little browse, have a little look and see what resonates and what hits, and you can contact me directly through any of those spaces as well. And I think I just wanted to kind of leave your viewers and listeners with pretty much a roundup of what we've been talking about, is that you can't go on forever in this hustle mentality. Your body will at some point give up on you, and you're more important than that, and you're worth more than that. No matter what the stories you tell yourself in the background, you deserve to give yourself the same kindness and compassion that you give to other people. And if you're running a business and you are finding yourself in this loop, then it's probably time that you look at that a little bit deeper. Shine a light on the shadows, because I guarantee you won't regret it. You'll move into a space that's really you, and yeah, your soul will thank you for it.
Beautiful. Thanks so much for joining me on this episode of the Female CEO podcast.
My pleasure. Thank you, Mark.
You've been listening to the Female CEO podcast, created by the Female CEO Create, Evolve, Overcome. This podcast amplifies women's voices, stories, and lived experience. Subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and on our YouTube channel, and discover more at thefemaleceo.com.